Hello everyone, this is Philosophy 72 Modern Philosophy Week 8, and this is the end of the second part of the class on Spinoza and Nietzsche. So again, we started with Descartes, Leibniz, the centrality we saw of the self in Descartes. He establishes that in modern philosophy. Then we saw Leibniz with the question of the individual substance, the many individual substances, different from Descartes, where in Descartes we saw the two substances of right, the thinking substance, the mind or soul, the extended substance, the body, right, this dualism. And then we saw with Spinoza one substance, which is God, which is nature, God or nature, same idea. And so immanence in Spinoza instead of transcendence. And then Nietzsche, we saw last time, right? I mean, we read sections from essays 1 and 2 from on the genealogy of morals or of morality according to the edition we are using. And and then today we saw some sections from part 1. Really, I asked you to read parts 1 and 2, but maybe I will focus on some moments in part 1 of this great book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which is also, right, the subtitle is a book for none and all, okay? And then in the weeks, the remaining weeks, 4 weeks that we have, the third part of the class, we will do Kierkegaard, Sartre, and Heidegger. So, in any case, remember the theme of the class is the self, the other, and the world, right? I mean, that's the general theme. We also started actually before we got into Descartes. Remember Gramsci, you should keep those pages from the prison notebooks in mind on the study of philosophy, very important, and also the exercise we did in relation to the painting by René Magritte, right? This is not a pipe. So we saw even in that respect, we saw the question of metaphysics, ontology, epistemology. We saw these important, right, concepts that you should keep in mind, grasp their meaning, fundamental branches in philosophy. We saw the important concept of thisness, right, that came back in Leibniz as well. But in any case, one important thing is this question of the self. Again, the self, the I think in Descartes, the self which is criticized certainly by the philosophy of emotions in Spinoza, and the idea, remember, that the individual is a kingdom within a kingdom is fictional, right, doesn't really exist, this independent and sovereign individual. And we saw the same with Nietzsche. I mean, he criticizes, of course, he makes fun even, right, of the free, the independent, sovereign, he says, individual, master of a free will. The free will doesn't really exist for Nietzsche, just like for Spinoza. And in Nietzsche we also saw, well, I mean, in essay 1, the question of the difference between good and bad and good and evil, the two mentalities, moralities of the noble type, the slave type, the morality of resentment of the slave type. Remember, the slave, noble, these are like, let's say, psychological, anthropological types, right? And so we saw then the question of actually guilt in essay 2, and I used that as a keyword for today too, but the keywords for today that I chose in the syllabus, two of them, two expressions come from on the genealogy of morals: guilt, bad conscience, although this applies to Zarathustra too, and then the body. The focus on the body which already becomes important with Spinoza, the emotions, remember. And then also, of course, with Nietzsche, actually, one passage by Nietzsche from Zarathustra, that spoke Zarathustra, that I want to focus on and particularly highlight will be from chapter 4 in part 1, this great chapter called on the despisers of the body. Okay, and I will read this really important passage from that chapter, okay, in a moment, okay. And actually, let me say, this is what I suggest. Again, you can choose any other thing for your writing today, okay, for your journal discussion board entry, really. And that's the I give you parts of the quote that I read. The body is a great intelligence. Maybe in your version, the translation is a bit different. Same idea. The body is a great reason. Body is a great intelligence, a multiplicity with one sense, a war and a peace, a herd and a shepherd. So I say elaborate, interpret on this, but in any case, I'll go back to this in a moment, okay? So, but again, make sure that you do the discussion board entries, right? We had last Sunday, I believe we had this Zoom meeting. There wasn't a class, not many people showed up, but I understand many people weren't able to do so, probably, but it wasn't a class. I will schedule another one maybe in a couple of weeks. It is, like I said in my email, a way to touch base, and then another expression came to mind. It can be understood as a community meeting, in the sense in which the class is also a community, and especially in this time of difficulties, extreme difficulties for some, tragic situations for others, right? That a time in which we are not able to see each other and so on. Maybe it's good to have this, we are moving toward the end of the semester, but maybe we will do one or maybe two, maybe one last meeting at the end of the semester, okay? So in any case, Zarathustra, if you go to the book, I have also a different edition, but it doesn't matter. But let me begin by actually highlighting some important moments, something about the structure even of the book. You see that this book, right, is divided into parts, right? I mean, 4 parts, but there is also, which is important to the prologue, Zarathustra's prologue, that you should read right before part 1 begins, right? And then it is here that precisely begins by saying, when Zarathustra was 30 years old, he left his home and the lake of his home and went into the mountains. Okay, that's in the prologue. So that's the setting of the story. I mean, Zarathustra that goes away and then comes back. Okay, that's basically the story. The idea, you see Zarathustra, this kind of strange, poetic character, right, that speaks to the stars, to everything, everybody. Then he meets this saint, this wise person who had already gone to the woods, to the mountains, and then they speak. And at the end of the first section of the prologue, right, you read, but when Zarathustra was alone, right, they part away. When Zarathustra was alone, he spoke thus to his heart. Could it be possible, he says, this one saint, this wise person, this old person in the mountains, in the forest, has not yet heard anything of this, that God is dead? In italics. Okay, maybe I mentioned this last time. This is one of the concepts that you should keep in mind of the themes, but I did say how this comes, and it is controversial, it is very famous, infamous, whatever. In Nietzsche, God is dead. He says God is dead, and we have actually killed him. I said last time how this comes, in a sense, to Nietzsche from right. Dostoevsky says Fyodor Dostoevsky, the Russian great Russian novelist, that if God is dead, then everything is permissible. I made a reference to Dostoevsky's great novel Crime and Punishment, the story of Raskolnikov. I mean, I said a few things, but you can Google this or read the novel, great novel as well. And then, Nietzsche draws the consequences, at the end of the 19th century. Remember that then Nietzsche dies in the year 1900 exactly. God is dead. And so what comes after that, after the death of God, is precisely what we know from history, right? The unfolding of a century of violence, the 20th century, and today, this, the beginning of this century. That doesn't mean that before that there was no violence whatsoever, or that the stability of God was never called into question. I mean, I don't want to go into that now, but certainly there was a movement away from the certainty that God was there, protecting everybody, this idea of providence and so on and so forth, which is still around, but again, has been was called into question. Certainly with Nietzsche, we have this idea that God is dead, and therefore we are on our own, right? I mean, there is this need to, what Nietzsche also speaks of in terms of a transvaluation of all values that have come to nothing. That's the philosophy, the ideology of nihilism. I spoke about this already. Nihilism, right, which is the ideology that was embraced by Raskolnikov as well in the novel by Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment. Nihilism, no values and so on and so forth, nothing to look forward to in life and so on. But in any case, the important point that we have in Nietzsche is that if there is a moment of distraction, right, there is a destructive moment in his philosophy, there is also then a constructive one. We had to build something new. And away from, remember that there is this critique in Nietzsche: demolish everything, philosophize with a hammer, demolish, destroy metaphysics, religion, morality, build something new on the aesthetic, dimension, basis, the body, the aesthetic, right? Art, life should be a work of art. So if actually God is dead, the human being also is about to die. That's basically what Nietzsche is saying. The human being and the man, that he sees as European man, especially of his time, is sick, a sickly animal, will also perish, die just like God. And there is this very important concept that you find in your text in Zarathustra, the overman, which in German is Übermensch, overman, but mensch is right, not man in the gender sense, male, but man, human, right? So Übermensch can be understood as overhuman, right? Remember, if you encounter the expression Superman, that was the way it was translated. Often in the past, in many languages, it would be a problem. It's not Superman in any possible meaning of the word, but it is the overhuman, that which comes after, the death of a man, right? The man that we know, again, that Nietzsche knew, especially the European man. We saw the other day that madhouse of culture, right? I mean, the prison of society and peace, civilization, and so on and so forth. Okay, so there is again a movement away from precisely this metaphysical split that we Nietzsche inherits from the tradition of what he understands metaphysics to be, you know, the tradition coming from Plato, right? And also the Judeo-Christian tradition together. That's what he criticizes mainly. This life is nothing. The true life begins after we die. The body is nothing. It should be despised. Precisely the despisers of the body that we will see in chapter 4 of part 1. The soul is everything, and so on and so forth. Nietzsche goes completely against this way of thinking. Okay, he wants to destroy this way of thinking, and he says actually stay close to the earth, stay close to the body. That's what's important. That's what the Übermensch, the overman, ultimately does. Okay, so this is actually what you will find before we get into that important moment in. And I don't want to be too long in book 4, right? I mean, again, um, so first of all, at the end of the prologue, you see that Zarathustra goes under, right? This going under is also then a coming, you know, up again and beyond, right? And he speaks still in the prologue. Let me stay with the prologue. First of all, there are some very beautiful moment, right, that we should maybe call attention to. After the idea that God is dead, then the overman, I teach you the overman. What is the overman? You find this on page 13 of your um, version, right, of Zarathustra, right, page 13, and this is section 3 of the prologue. What is the overman? I teach you the overman. I mean, he's giving the example, the illustration of the tight rope walker, right? I mean, which is this crossing into the danger, which is important for Nietzsche. Crossing is always a dangerous moment, motion, movement, passage, right? So, and he says, I teach you, I'm reading the overman. Man is something to be overcome, to be surpassed. Okay, we have to go beyond. What have you done to surpass him, and so on. Then I skip a few lines, and again he says, still on page 13, toward the bottom, you know, the end. Behold, again, that's the language Zarathustra, almost like a preacher, right, uses. I teach you the overman. Again, what is the overman? The overman, I'm reading, is the meaning of the earth. Very important. So let your will say the overman shall be the meaning of the earth. Okay, so that's very important, the meaning of the earth, meaning, you know, stay close, again, remain close and faithful to the earth. Don't think about, you know, the afterworldly life and so on and so forth, because all this is, as Nietzsche says, a fairy tale. All this is a lie, right? The earth is everything. And perhaps today, you know, I leave that to you to elaborate on, but think about something like Earth Day that we had probably last week. You know, think about the importance of thinking today about the question of the environment, right? Climate change and so on. So, but then he continues, he says, I appeal to you, my brothers, that's the language he uses, remain true to the earth. That's at the end of page 13. And do not believe those who speak to you of otherworldly hopes. Very clear, right? These people are poisoners. Poisoners are they, whether they know it or not. They, you know, and then he says, despisers of life are they, and then we will see also the section on the chapter from part one, on the despisers of the body. Here in the prologue, he says these people, which is the priestly class that we saw, the slave mentality, the priestly class that we saw on the genealogy of morality last week. Those people whose only action, whose only deed is to say no to everything that comes from the outside. Remember? Same idea, okay? And then he says at the beginning, the top of page 14, still in the same section of the prologue, to sinning, right, which is so important in many traditions, religions, right, to sin, and so on and so forth, right? He says, look, I mean, in a very provocative way, which is Nietzsche's typical way of saying things or writing, to sin against the earth is now the most terrible sin. Against the earth, and then we will see against the body as well. Okay, here he already starts, problematizing the relationship between the body and the soul. So, but then, in section 4 of the prologue, he says, this is still the top of the page, this is page 15, man, again, that's the passage, the dangerous passage, the crossing that I was speaking about, the threshold, really, between, in Nietzsche's case, man and the other man, what is old and dying, and what is now, and the not yet to come, that we must build, we must construct, and the idea precisely of, sorry, there is some background noise, but what can I do? They're doing working, and essential work. So, I mean, there is this passage into something that must be constituted, constructed by us, okay? So he says, man, I'm reading, is a rope stretched between animal and the other man, right? This threshold, this passage, right? A rope over an abyss, okay? So there is this crossing, and the crossing happens over the abyss, and of course there is a danger of falling into the abyss, right? A dangerous crossing, I'm reading again, it's a dangerous crossing, a dangerous on the way, a dangerous looking back, a dangerous trembling and stopping. Think about, keeping the balance, the tightrope walker, right? I mean, this trembling and stopping, trembling, which is a word. Remember this, they will come back next week also when we do Kierkegaard, okay? The anxiety that we will see in Kierkegaard, the trembling, the fear. So there is this danger, but the danger of experience. There is danger in doing something new, in crossing, right? In, passing the threshold. And then he says, I'm reading again, what is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. What can be loved in man is that he is an overgoing and a downgoing. Okay, so the idea, the bridge, the process is more important than the goal. Okay, that the point of arrival, right? And so that's basically the idea of the overman. You can say so much about this. It's really, think about what this is, but there are so many implications, there are so many ways of applying these to situations of our, daily life experience, the world of politics, of culture, especially today, that we are in this moment because of the pandemic that now we don't know when. I just read the headlines, I believe yesterday somewhere, that now apparently there are those scientists as well who say that the pandemic might perhaps last 2 years, be over in 2022, just like, I don't know, the Spanish flu began ultimately in 1917, ended probably in 1919, or the the Black Death in right? The Middle Ages, in the middle of the 14th century. I mean, maybe the peak was 1348, 1347, for 1348, but it started before, it ended after that, right? 1 year before, a couple of years after, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's always the case, right? So, in any case, in this moment of suspension, perhaps it is important to think about the reality of the passage, the crossing, right? And also what it means to go from what is real, what is actual, and what is, potential in front of us, possibility, and so on. Okay, so in any case, he says that man is dying, the last man, and the other man, I repeat, is coming. He says on page 17, behold, I show you the last man. Okay, and then there is a nice moment as well toward the end. Again, you have this highlighted right on page 17, that he complains about this. This is a very important moment in the critique of modernity that we find in Nietzsche, we find in Kierkegaard, who, as I said last time, comes before Nietzsche, but we'll do Kierkegaard next week, okay? The critique of the crowd, the critique of the herd mentality, and therefore the critique of sameness, identity, everybody the same, conformity, to conform. We will see this in Kierkegaard as well. But here Nietzsche says, I'm reading again, everyone wants the same. Everyone is the same. He who feels differently goes voluntarily into the madhouse. Of course, he says, with a strong degree of irony, but it is true. Again, if someone shows some important, difference, this we'll speak about this standing out of existence with existentialism next time, although that applies to Nietzsche too. The standing out means that one is noticed precisely, there is a danger right there, and then one may be, not only does one go voluntarily, as Nietzsche says, into the madhouse, but one is likely to be stigmatized as the other in a negative sense, different in a negative sense, because we had this strange way of thinking about difference as something negative, right? Stigmatized as the deviant, the sick, and so on and so forth. Okay, so but Nietzsche is clear. He goes beyond all this. He says, for example, on page 19, there is no devil and no hell. And in any case, let me move on. The prologue, right, again, is very important, and so read that as well. And he goes now. I will show again, the other man, and so at the end of the prologue, you see that Nietzsche says, "Thus began Zarathustra's down going." Remember, he had gone into the mountains. He's now going back to society to bring also the word, right? The word that God is dead, the word of right, the coming of the overman, of the need to remake everything, and so on. To precisely, you see, also in part 1, called the three metamorphoses, toward the end, to create new values, the transvaluation of all values. We need the all values are no longer good, right? And certainly we cannot rely on what comes was handed down to us from the tradition. There is this need to create new values. Okay, so that's really important. You had the metamorphosis. I not going into that, but also because I see already, like I said, I don't want to be too long, but I want to call attention to a few other points, and certainly maybe I'll go, let me see, directly to uh, part 4, like I was saying, part 4 on I mean, he goes back to the question of the meaning of the earth. This is very important. We saw in the prologue, also at the end of chapter 3 in part 1. Okay, that's page 31. The meaning of the earth, and then the despisers of the body. And he says, okay, I'm reading, this is from the version that you have actually. The body is a great intelligence, that's page 31, or a great reason. Think about this. Usually we believe that reason, intelligence is whatever we call the mind and so on, let alone the brain, which is part of the body and so on, but the mind, right? And the body is typically in the tradition coming from Descartes, the body is simply attached, this machine attached to the mind. Remember what Descartes says, unless I know what I am, I could mistake any other thing for myself. And the thing that I could mistake for myself for Descartes is the body, precisely. That's not what I am, who I am. I am for Descartes a thinking thing, the mind slash soul, a thing which thinks, entirely made of thought. In Nietzsche, we have a distraction of all this deconstruction, distraction, dismantling of all this type of thinking, right? The body now is takes central stage. The body thinks, right? So the body, right? So and this is at the beginning of. I can't go into that. I mean, if we were in the face-to-face section, but you can, Google that and see if you can find, if you're interested, some information about the recuperation of the body in philosophy with phenomenology, for example, the phenomenology of the body. What the body does. The body is what the body does. The body is not an instrument that can be, remotely controlled and by the mind. And okay, it's not that if I move my arm, it's because my mind tells my arm move, and the arm moves. But and again, this is a tradition that you find in many other. This is a way of thinking that you find in many other traditions. I mean, typically in the ancient Chinese tradition of Taoism, right, on which things like, Tai Chi, and then the martial arts are based. I mean, in Tai Chi, typically, right, what you had, Tai Chi Chuan, is this, let's call it this balance of body and mind. They are both together in the same very slow motion, right, that happens in Tai Chi. Again, the body is thinking and doing everything. Okay, so the body is not simply, it's not that I use my hand to write, as a philosopher says, just like I use a pen, right? But I become my hand writing when I write. Okay, so in any case, the body is a great intelligence. I return to Nietzsche also because we had to move toward the end of this. So I'm reading a multiplicity, a plurality, with one sense, a war and a peace, a herd and a shepherd. And then he says, this is what I put in the syllabus, but you should go back, or on Blackboard, you should go back and look at the whole then passage, because Nietzsche continues, he says, an instrument of your body is also your little intelligence, my brother, which you call spirit. A little instrument and toy of your great intelligence, which is the body. Okay? So it's, in a sense, a reversal of what we usually think about in terms of right, the body, the mind, and so on and so forth. The soul. It's not that the soul is right in the body as if it were in prison and so on. It's the other way around, if anything. And then he continues. I, in quote, remember the theme of the class, the self, the I think, the I established by Descartes, I, you say, and are proud of that word, but greater is that in which you do not wish to believe. Your body, with its great, your body with its great intelligence, it does not say I, but does I. Okay, think about this. The body does not say I think, therefore I am, and so on and so forth. The body does I. And this relates to that section from that passage that I put in the syllabus and on Blackboard from last time from the genealogy of morals, right? That the doer is only attached, an afterthought attached to the deed. The deed is everything the body does. And the body does I, meaning the body constitutes, the body produces itself, or as some people might say, the subjectivity, but doesn't speak about it, doesn't think about it. It does it, it produces it, it makes it. Okay? So in any case, that's basically the idea. The body that then comes back this idea at the top of page 32, another great moment, passage in Nietzsche, short but very important. There is more reason, sanity, intelligence in your body than in your best wisdom. Okay, so that's basically what reason is in the body. Sanity is in the body, contrary to a long tradition of a long philosophical, religious, theological tradition that completely usually denigrates, despises the body, and so on and so forth. The body whereby we make mistakes, the body whereby we sin, and so on and so forth. Okay, in Nietzsche there is a reversal, let's say, of to say the least, of all this. But in any case, because I want to call attention to at least one other moment, which is when he speaks about the new idol. But you should read at least the whole of part 1, maybe part 2 as well. I had assigned that. Then there is a nice section also, chapter 9 of part 1, called The Preachers of Death, but the new idol. The new idol, this is interesting also because of the political, right, dimension of this, speaking about the state, the political state, okay? He says somewhere, but the logic is the same, right? We will see. Somewhere there are still peoples and herds, but not with us, my brothers. Here there are states. A state, what is that? I'm reading. Well, open now your ears to me. Nietzsche says, Zarathustra says, for now will I say to you my word concerning the deaths of peoples. When you had the state, then the people disappear. That's basically the idea. The state, just like the I, says I, right? But the people, like the body, is completely then eliminated by the emergence of the state. That's basically the idea. State, he says, is the name of the coldest of all cold monsters. Coldly lies it also, and this lie creeps from its mouth. I, the state, am the people. I mean, we hear that statement so often. Many people believe that this is actually the case, right? We, the people, I, the state, am the people. But in reality, there is in Nietzsche, in Zarathustra, this fundamental, mm, you know, exposition of a revealing of a falsity. He says right after that, he says it is a lie. This is, I, the state, and the people. That's a lie, right? So just like the eye that takes the place of the mind, that takes the place of the body, and so on and so forth. Okay. So then he continues. There is a critique, very interesting critique of this, right? I mean, the question of the state versus the question of the people, and this is what the monster, right? The cold monster, which is the state, at the end of page 43. According to Nietzsche, according to Zarathustra, also says, this is very nice, by the way, on earth there is nothing greater than I. It is I who am the regulating finger of God. I mean, think about this. So many ways to, illustrate this, to apply this. Think about the various leaders, today or historically, and so on. But for Nietzsche, for Zarathustra, these are all madmen. Madmen, they all seem to me. And then again, the question is that of uh, the overman, the crossing into the overman that happens through going back also into one's solitude that you find also at the beginning of of chapter 12, page 45, right, which is where solitude begins. Solitude, not loneliness, right? Think about the difference between solitude as a positive word and loneliness as a negative. But solitude begins where the marketplace of everybody, of a conformity, where everybody is the same, must be the same, and so on, ends. The marketplace ends, solitude begins, and so on and so forth. But in any case, I hope that this gives you a sense. There would be so much more to say, but I see, it's already longer than I wanted this to be, and so put together, although you had to write something for last week on genealogy of morality, and then today Zarathustra, but together, put together these two readings that you're doing, and also relate this to what we have seen in Spinoza in the previous 2 weeks, and also all together in the class, the theme of the class, okay, the self, the other, the world, okay, and okay, see you next time, okay, thank you, bye.